Something happened to me, and I still can't explain it. And every time I try to put this into words, I feel like I'm opening a door that should remain locked forever. Maybe I'm doing this because I have no one else to turn to. Or maybe it's because, deep down, I need someone to believe in me. Whoever you are, please listen. I was driving through a remote part of Nevada, between Tonopah and Ely, a stretch of road that seemed stretched by invisible hands. It was a little after 3 in the morning, that time when the desert no longer looks like a desert. It looks like a dead place, frozen in time, as if forgotten by the rest of the world. The moon was just a faint, almost lazy white outline, and the headlights of my truck seemed the only point of life in that dry immensity. I had already been driving for many hours, too long, and this is something I've never confessed before. I wasn't doing well at that time. Since the divorce, my nights had become an empty space where bad thoughts multiplied. I felt drained, exhausted, kind of hollow inside. Driving in the early morning hours had always been my way of avoiding being alone at home, alone with myself. But that night, the silence seemed even heavier. Everything inside the cabin seemed amplified. The hum of the engine, the faint whistling of the wind coming through the rubber seal of the window. Even my own breathing seemed out of place, short, unsteady. That's when I realized I was gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The palm of my hand was damp with sweat. I don't know why, I just felt a weight, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat, watching me. I tried to ignore it. I turned on the radio, but all that came out was a low, scratchy interference, almost a murmur. I hesitated. I glanced at the seat next to me. Nothing. Of course, nothing. But the feeling remained, an invisible presence clinging to the back of my neck. The yellow lines on the road flashed beneath the headlights like the repeated pulses of a weak heart. Nevada was a silent desert in that stretch, without a living soul, without cell phone signal, without cities for almost 100 kilometers. And in the midst of that emptiness, I saw, far, very far, a silhouette. I blinked several times. The body lay motionless in the center of the lane, so far away it could easily have been just a lamppost, a shadow, a trick of my weary mind. But something about the way that figure was standing made my breathing quicken. So rigid, so alone, so wrong. It must be exhaustion, I murmured. My voice sounded weak in the cabin, but when I turned my head to the side mirror, I swear I saw something moving too fast to be wind. Like a blur passing close to the car body, the road continued, straight, endless. The desert breathed that stillness that one only perceives when truly alone. But then, I heard a dry sound coming from the side of the truck. Goal. I froze completely. It took me a few seconds to process what had happened, and then it came again. Tum. 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 3 slow, precise strikes, as if someone were knocking on the cabin door. It was as if I had someone by my side in the dark. My stomach churned. I felt a chill run up my spine to my scalp. I didn't brake. I couldn't brake. I just stood there, driving, while the sound repeated itself, each time softer, each time more human. When I finally mustered the courage to look in the side mirror, there was nothing, just the desert, darkness, and the absolute certainty that I was not alone on that road. I kept driving, trying to convince myself that the sounds I heard were just vibrations from the metal body, some displacement of air, anything explainable. But it was a lie. I knew it was a lie. My whole body was too tense to believe any rational explanation. The road stretched straight, endless, as if slowly swallowing me whole. The white line ran under the bumper, and each kilometer seemed quieter than the last. Nevada has this power to transform emptiness into something alive, pulsating, almost conscious, and that night, I felt the desert watching me. That's when I saw her, not like before, like a distant silhouette. This time, she was there, about 30 meters ahead, directly on the crosswalk, completely still. I slammed on the brakes. The truck jolted so hard that my body was thrown forward. The seatbelt snapped shut, and the tires screeched against the asphalt. The entire cab vibrated as if it were about to fall apart. My eyes were fixed on the figure ahead, and what I saw almost made my heart stop. She was a woman completely soaked. Water trickled from the ends of her hair, dripping into dark puddles around her feet. The dress, if you could even call it a dress, clung to her body, heavy, wet, clinging to her skin as if she had just emerged from a deep lake. But there was no water anywhere. It hadn't rained for days, and we were in the middle of the desert. The headlight only half illuminated her face, but it was enough to realize that something was very, very wrong. She wasn't trembling. He was not visibly breathing. It didn't seem alive. I stood there, paralyzed, staring. A dry throat. My hands were sweating. My whole body was begging me to reverse and drive away, but I couldn't. I just stood there watching. And then she disappeared. It didn't move. It didn't fall. It didn't happen. It simply vanished into thin air. I barely had time to process when bam, bam, bam! 3 violent blows exploded on the cabin door. I let out an involuntary scream, my whole body shaking with fright. The sound was so loud, so real, so close, that I pushed myself against the seat as if that could protect me. I turned my face away slowly, very slowly, and I saw a hand on the side window. A pale hand, soaked. Water was dripping as if it had been plunged into an icy river seconds before. The woman was there, right next to my window, with her head down, as if she were trying to breathe. I couldn't move a muscle. She slowly raised her face, revealing eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light from the headlights. Her lips were purple, trembling, and then she spoke. He wouldn't let me go. Her voice didn't sound human. It was damp, muffled, like someone speaking underwater. The sentence came out drawn out, weak, trembling. She repeated it. He wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't let me go. Each word made the air inside the cabin heavier, almost unbreathable. I felt my chest tighten, my vision darken at the edges, as if something were draining the heat from my body. I closed my eyes for a second. Just a second. When I opened it, she wasn't there anymore. No sound, no movement, no presence. But on the glass, right where his hand had touched, the brand remained, a perfect, crisp watermark, slowly running down. It was as if a piece of the woman had remained there, stuck to me, to my truck, to my night. It took me almost a minute to be able to breathe again. I wanted to believe I had imagined it all. It was the tiredness, the loneliness, the empty road. But when I got out of the cabin, my legs trembling, and walked over to the metal body, there they were. 2 handprints in ink, as if someone had desperately clung to the truck. Seconds passed, or perhaps minutes. I don't remember. I only remember the cold wind and a single thought repeating in my head. If she touched the truck, then she was real. And that was far, far worse than any other explanation. I don't know how I managed to get back inside that cabin. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull the door. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if any wrong move could attract that thing again. But remaining standing there, in the middle of the road, also felt like suicide. I started the engine with difficulty. My fingers slipped on the dashboard because of the sweat. The gear engaged with a dry click. And as I accelerated, all I could think about was the sound of the knocking on the door. Her voice, muffled, wet. He wouldn't let me go. Those words remained stuck in my ear, even with the engine roaring, even with the wind coming in through the crack in the window. I tried to push the thought away, but it always came back, like a persistent echo. The stretch to the next gas station seemed endless. The faint lights in the distance seemed to recede each time I got closer. The road was so dark that I felt if I slammed on the brakes, the entire desert would swallow the truck. When I finally arrived at the gas station, one of those nearly abandoned ones, with 2 old pumps, a crooked bathroom door, and a flashing sign, my body collapsed with relief. I parked the truck to the side, near the dim light of the lamppost, and turned everything off. Silence. Absolute silence. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to steady my breathing. But it was useless. The air felt too heavy, too hot inside the cabin. I smelled rust, hot dust, and something else. A damp, cold smell, like wet clothes forgotten in a corner. The same feeling as the woman. I swallowed hard. I grabbed the tablet attached to the dashboard and opened the external camera system. The first image appeared, right side view. The road was empty. Nothing. I switched to the front camera, the dark asphalt. Nothing. I switched to the left, and once again, nothing. No women, no shadow, no hands on the glass. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that this should be a relief. But it wasn't, because I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard, and it had happened right there, next to me. I pulled up the recording from the last few hours, dragging the timeline back to the moment I stopped on the road. My heart raced when the video got to the part with the heartbeats. I stared intently at the screen, and there was nothing. In the video, the door was quiet. The glass had no hands. The bodywork was clean, and I was sitting inside the cabin, turning my face to the side, as if I were seeing something that the system simply didn't register. My mouth went dry. With each passing second that I watched, I felt a greater weight on my chest. Doubt creeps in. That was the question I was trying to avoid. What if I was delirious? What if I was losing my mind? But then the image shook, just for a moment, less than a second. A blur passed through the lens, as if something had blocked the light. I paused the video. I went back to the previous frame. Nothing. I came back again. Nothing. I moved forward, and there it was. A dark blur, like wet hair blown by the wind. Shivers ran down my spine. I turned off the tablet and threw it on the seat next to me. I needed to get out of the cabin, to breathe, to touch solid ground. I opened the door and went downstairs, feeling the morning chill on my face. The air was colder than it should have been, abnormally cold. I looked around. The gas station was empty. No cars, no employees, no truck drivers, just me. And the sound of the wind passing through the metal plates. I tried to convince myself that I was alone there, until I heard steps. Slow, dragging steps, coming through the gravel behind the truck. The sound was unmistakable, that kind of wet step, heavy, as if each movement left a trail of water on the ground. I turned around slowly. His heart was beating so loudly it seemed to echo inside his chest. Nothing. The empty desert, lit only by dim streetlights and the distant moon. But the sound continued. Arrast. 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 That's when I saw the shadow. In the truck's door window, reflected by the streetlight, a silhouette slowly passed by. Long hair. Smooth movement, like someone walking alongside the cabin. My blood ran cold. I instinctively recoiled, stumbling on the low sidewalk. When I finally mustered the courage to look directly out the window, there was nothing. No shadow, no women, no movement. I was alone, but the floor, right next to the door, was wet. Small, scattered puddles, like shapeless footprints. I swallowed hard, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I no longer knew what was real. But one thing was certain. It was following me. I stood there, beside the truck, staring at those uneven puddles on the ground. They glistened in the dim light of the lamppost, as if they had just formed. But it didn't make sense. There was no moisture in the air. It hadn't rained. There wasn't any water source nearby. Even so, the footprints, or what appeared to be footprints, were fresh. Recent. A shiver ran down the back of my neck so strongly that my eyes welled up with tears. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt heavy, thick, almost solid. It was as if something was pressing on my chest, pushing my heart down. I walked to the front of the truck, taking slow, calculated steps, as if any quicker movement might attract the attention of whatever was there with me. With each step, the sound of the gravel beneath my feet seemed too loud, too clear in the desert silence. "Hello?" My voice came out weak and trembling. "Is anyone there?" He didn't answer. Only the wind slowly passing between the metal plates of the gas station. But he was carrying something, a strange smell. Smell of wet clothes, smell of stagnant water, the smell of fear. I took a step back, feeling my heart race again. The feeling of being watched was so strong it hurt. I knew that I wasn't alone. I walked around the truck, illuminating the ground with my cell phone flashlight. The puddles were still there. And then I realized something that made me completely freeze. They formed a trail. A trail of water ran from the cab door, all the way to the back of the truck. My lips became dry. My body ached and was tense, like a cornered animal. I didn't want to go there. Every part of my brain was screaming at me to get back in the cab, start the engine, and get off that road. But another part, a part I didn't recognize, pushed me into the darkness behind the truck bed. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I walked. With each step, the trail of water became clearer, the larger puddles, the strongest smell. I turned the corner of the truck bed, and I heard a sound I'll never forget. Breathing, slow breathing, drowned, like someone trying to breathe with lungs full of water. My vision blurred for a moment. I thought about running, but my legs froze. And before I could react, a voice emerged from the darkness behind the truck. He wouldn't let me go. My heart raced so fast that I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I turned the flashlight towards the sound, but the light failed. It flickered twice, then came back dim. That's when I saw her. The woman. The same woman from the road. The same soaked figure. She was leaning against the rear bumper, her body bent over, as if she were about to collapse. But her face... His face was turned towards me. Black eyes, pale skin. The dress was soaked, water dripping onto the floor, trickling down like tears. I tried to take a step back, but my foot slipped and I almost fell. She slowly raised her arm, her hand trembling, pointing at me. "He's still here," she whispered, "and he wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't let anyone go." My breathing became short and irregular, as if the same pressure that had dominated the desert was now crushing my lungs. "Who?" I managed to say, almost voicelessly. "Who wouldn't let you go?" The response took a while. She tilted her head to the side slowly, as if the movement were painful. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time I felt a cold wave wash over my entire body. "The man in the desert," she said, choking. "The one who stays on the side of the road, the one who called me, the one who kept me, underwater." I felt my stomach churn. That made absolutely no sense. The desert has no water. There are no rivers. There are no deep lakes. But she continued, "He's close by. He can see you right now. And he doesn't want you to help me." The flashlight blinked again. The wind picked up, kicking up dust around my feet. A deep sound, almost a muffled growl, echoed through the metal of the car body. And before I could react, the woman disappeared. It didn't happen. It didn't move. It did not dissolve in water. She simply wasn't there anymore. Only the distant sound, very distant, of something scraping the asphalt on the shoulder of the road. A sound that wasn't hers. It couldn't have been hers. But it was getting closer. Slowly. Dragged. It was as if something enormous was walking through the darkness, coming towards me. I backed up until my back hit the fuel tank. I clung to the metal, trying to maintain my sanity as the noise grew louder. And I realized, horrified, that it wasn't wind, it wasn't an animal, it wasn't human. And when the sound finally stopped, the silence was so absolute that it hurt my ears. The sensation that overwhelmed my body was clear, sharp, and cutting. I wasn't alone at that gas station. And whatever was there, it wasn't the woman. It was him. The sun began to rise behind the Nevada mountains, tinging the sand a timid orange. The truck was parked at a small, almost abandoned gas station, less than 40 kilometers from where it had all happened. Ethan was still trembling. The cab door remained open, as if he had left in a hurry. And he had, on the bodywork, now illuminated by the dawn, the handprints were clearer. They weren't just impressions. They were deep stains, as if fingers had pressed into the metal with impossible force. Each mark seemed shiny, wet, as if moisture insisted on clinging to the vehicle even under the growing desert heat. The gas station attendant watched from a distance, worried but too afraid to approach. Ethan tried to explain, but his voice was barely a whisper, and he knew his words sounded like delirium. Nothing made sense. Nothing seemed real. He walked slowly to the door, touched one of the marks, and felt the cold. A damp, repulsive cold that climbed up his arm and chilled the back of his neck. It was the same sensation as her presence. The soaked woman. The one who kept repeating, "He wouldn't let me go." Ethan closed his eyes, trying to understand. And then he realized something. The marks on the door weren't just handprints. The water dripping from them seemed to spread across the floor in small rivulets, forming an irregular trail, a trail that led away from the truck towards the desert. The trail was starting to dry out in the sun, but it was still visible, and she was leading it to nowhere. Against all human instinct for survival, Ethan continued. Each step was accompanied by the feeling that the desert was watching, attentive. A few meters from the post, the trail disappeared completely, not evaporated, but interrupted, as if something had been ripped from the world at that exact point. That's when he heard her. Ethan. His name. Low. Wet. Echoing behind him, even though there was no one there. He turned around slowly, and she was there. The woman was soaked. Her skin was pale. Her dress clung to her body. Water dripped incessantly, as if she had just emerged from a deep lake, forgotten by time. But now there was something different. She didn't seem desperate. She wasn't banging on the door. She wasn't shouting. She just stared at him, motionless, as if she had finally found him. "You saw," she said, in a voice that seemed to come from inside the water. "Then you can help me." Ethan took a step back. His heart was racing. "What do you want?" The woman slowly raised her arm, and behind her, as if the desert were being distorted, a silhouette took shape. Tall, fixed, a human shadow that cast no shadow at all. It had no face, only the suggestion of a still, rigid body turned towards Ethan. The woman spoke without moving her lips. "He wouldn't let me go. Now it won't leave you." The shadow moved forward a single step, and the world seemed to tremble. Ethan ran. He ran like he'd never run before. He returned to the gas station, straight into the truck, starting the engine with trembling hands. The attendant shouted something, but Ethan didn't hear. He accelerated, taking off violently, kicking up dust and gravel. Looking in the rearview mirror, he saw the woman standing motionless on the side of the road. The shadow was behind her. They both watched as the truck drove away, and then, At the edge of her field of vision, the woman raised her arm again, as if in a gesture of farewell or warning. Ethan drove non-stop until he left the desert. Only when he reached the nearest town could he truly breathe. He pulled the truck over, turned everything off, and tried to convince himself that it hadn't happened, that the cameras hadn't shown anything, that maybe it was a hallucination. But when he got out of the cabin, he saw something on the ground, a trail of water, fresh, going from the truck door to your feet. And on the metal of the door, a new phrase, formed by small damp spots, as if invisible fingers had drawn each letter. "He thinks you took me." Ethan collapsed. The desert, somehow, had followed him. And the woman too. Something happened to me, and even now, as I write this, my hands are shaking. If you came across this account, please believe every word. I don't want anyone to go through what I went through on that road. That night in Utah, I had been driving for hours, following the BR 191, that deserted stretch where the horizon always seems meters too far away. It was around 2:40 in the morning, the kind of time when even thoughts echo in your head. That silence, that emptiness, it always gets to me. I don't know if it's age or insomnia that's been destroying me, but lately I've felt like something is following me during my night shifts. Not someone, something. The temperature on the dashboard read 12 degrees, but it felt like something icy was running down the back of my neck. I opened the window for a moment to try and breathe some fresh air, but the desert wind was still. Dead. It was like breathing inside a switched-off freezer. I was alone on the road, no lights, no cars. Just that yellowish beam of my headlights cutting through the darkness like two blunt knives. And then I saw a small silhouette walking on the shoulder of the road. I could hardly believe it when I got closer. It was a child, small, skinny, barefoot. The pale skin reflected the lighthouse beam in a strange way, as if covered by a thin layer of dust. It walked slowly, like someone who didn't know where to go, or as if it had been lost for a long time. My heart raced. I braked the truck so hard that everything on the dashboard shook. "Hey!" I shouted out the window. "Hey, are you okay?" The child didn't answer. She just turned her face slowly, so slowly, and stared at me. I swear on everything I have that look wasn't that of an ordinary child. There was no fear. There was no despair. There was something empty, like someone who already knows what's going to happen. I stepped out of the cabin with my flashlight in hand, the ground still warm from the day's sun, but the air around me felt icy. I took 3 steps toward her and felt my throat go dry. "Are you lost? Where did you come from?" The child slowly raised their hand and pointed to the dark desert, towards absolute nothingness, and he said only one sentence, a phrase that I still hear to this day when I try to fall asleep. "He's still there." My whole body froze. I tried to ask who. I tried to get closer, but when I blinked, the child was no longer there. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear running. Nothing. She simply no longer existed in that space. I looked all around, my heart pounding so fast it hurt. The desert was completely silent. The darkness seemed denser, as if it were breathing. And then I realized my flashlight was trembling. It wasn't the flashlight. It was my hand. When I returned to the cabin, the windshield was completely fogged up, as if someone had breathed there. Tiny breaths. Short. Short. Long. It looked like a child's breathing pattern. The temperature plummeted on the dashboard, 2 degrees, in seconds. That's when I smelled a strong smell of wet earth inside the truck. And for a moment, in the reflection of the side window, I saw something standing behind the truck, too tall to be the child, too dark to be a normal person. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I should have left at that moment. I should have ignored everything, But I didn't do that. And that was the worst choice of my life. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it all. The sleepiness, the empty road, the silence. It could all have played a trick on me. But the more I tried to calm down, the more my body reacted as if it were in danger. My shoulders were tense, my hands were sweating, and my breathing always seemed a little shorter than it should be. As soon as I started the truck, the interior lights flickered 3 times. They had never done that before. The engine took 2 seconds longer to respond. It felt heavy, like something was stuck to it. Even so, I took a deep breath and got back on the road. The Utah desert seemed larger that night, as if the darkness had spread more than usual. The white line of the road was the only thing keeping me oriented. The rest was just shadow, and silence, or almost silence. About 10 minutes later, I heard a sound coming from the cabin ceiling, a dry sound. Tack. Then another one. Tack. Tack. It was as if small stones were falling from the top of the truck. The problem was that there was no wind, and there was absolutely nothing around that could have been hitting the roof. I tried to ignore it, but the noise became more rhythmic, more intentional. Tack, tack, tack. I glanced in the rearview mirror, purely reflexively. I knew I wouldn't see anything, and yet, my eyes searched for something. Anything. And that's when I saw it. The child. Stopped in the middle of the track, many meters behind me, illuminated only briefly by the tail light. Inert, property, with my face turned towards my truck. I froze. That was impossible. She couldn't have been there. I had seen her disappear right in front of me. I blinked, and when I looked again, the figure was no longer there. It was at that moment that I felt the steering wheel vibrate under my hands, as if someone had touched it. I braced myself tightly and tried to keep the truck in the center of the lane. The dashboard beeped twice, another sharp drop in temperature. The thermometer read 1 degree C inside the cab. Within, the air grew so cold that my breath began to release tiny clouds into the air, and it was at that exact moment that I heard a sound that stopped my heart. Slow breathing, very slow breathing, coming from the passenger seat. I turned my face away slowly, afraid of what I was going to see. The bank was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It continued steadily. It was as if someone were sitting there, right next to me, feeling every second of my reaction. My skin broke out in goosebumps all over. "Is anyone there?" My voice came out shaky, almost inaudible. Breathing stopped. Absolute silence. Then, without warning, something scratched the cabin door. 3 dry scratches. Rrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr so hard that my fingers hurt. "Stop it! For God's sake!" I whispered, without realizing it. The truck jolted, as if it had run over something, but the road was smooth. No potholes. No obstacles. Nothing. When I looked again in the side mirror, I swear I saw a small hand pressed against the back window of the truck. A child's hand. But only for a second. As if it were accompanying me, or as if it were trying to get in. That's when I remembered the stories other drivers told about that stretch of the BR-191. Stories that I always thought were too exaggerated to believe. Stories about disappearances. Entire families that disappeared without a trace. In particular, a family from 1998. I never paid attention until that night, because when I looked back at the passenger seat, the window was fogged up, and right in the center, there was a drawing made with a finger. A circle, with a vertical line running through the middle. I had no idea what that meant, but the feeling I had was the same as someone saying, "I am here." The desert outside seemed to breathe along with the truck, as if it were alive, as if it were waiting for me to finally understand that something there was terribly wrong. I should have stopped. I should have turned back. but I continued. And that was exactly what I wanted. I kept driving, but something inside me already knew it didn't make a difference. I could accelerate to the limit. I could try to escape. But that presence wasn't outside. She was with me. The radio started to crackle, even though it was turned off. A dry noise, like distant static. But there was something strange about it. It seemed to have a rhythm, like breathing. I looked at the dashboard, trying to figure out if it was interference, some electrical problem, anything rational that could save me from what I was feeling. But there was no logic to it. Not on that road, not that night. The darkness around me seemed greater, thicker, as if the desert were closing in around me. The beam of the headlights didn't reach as far as it should. It was like driving inside a tunnel without walls. Just a narrow corridor of light, and, all around, an emptiness that seemed to be watching. The truck then lost power, little by little, as if it were being drained. The engine failed once, then again. The panel flashed. The interior lights went out, one by one, until only the faint light of the radio remained, which still crackled, breathing like a living being. And then everything died. The truck completely shut down, in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. The silence that followed was unusual. It was heavy. The kind of silence you feel on your skin that takes your breath away. I tried to start the engine. No response. I tried again. Nothing. That horrible feeling of being watched returned, stronger, more violent, as if something was standing right behind the truck. Motionless, waiting. I lowered the window slowly. The air outside was still, but cold, very cold. And that's when I heard it, a cry, weak, far away. But it's real. It came from the desert. I let out a breath without realizing I was holding it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood in my ears. I grabbed the flashlight, took a deep breath, and opened the cabin door. The sound of crying became clearer. It wasn't an adult crying, it was a child's. I took 3 steps toward the darkness. The desert seemed alive. There was no wind, but the sand moved in small eddies, as if something were passing by, creating invisible trails. I pointed the flashlight at the ground and saw tracks, tiny tracks, from bare feet, surrounding the truck. I knew they weren't there a minute before. I had looked. I was sure of it. But now, there were dozens. It was as if several children had walked around me while I was inside the cabin. The crying stopped. Suddenly, and in its place came a sound that chilled me to the bone. Laughter, children's laughter, distant, but echoing as if they were right beside me. They were broken laughs, devoid of joy. It was a sound, wrong, very wrong. The flashlight trembled in my hand. And between 2 rocks in the distance, I saw something moving, a tall shadow, elongated, too bent over to be human. She crawled slowly, in a way my brain refused to comprehend. I couldn't see his face. I couldn't see any details. But I knew. I knew that was the him the child had mentioned. I took a step back, almost tripping. And then the flashlight beam fell on something that took my breath away. The child was there, about 40 meters away. Stop. Property. Looking at me. She slowly raised her hand, as she had done before, and pointed behind her. For shade. To that which moved as if it were awakening. Her voice pierced the desert like a whisper that shouldn't exist. He found me first. I felt my chest tighten. The desert seemed to tighten around me. The shadows moved as if they were breathing with me. The child took 2 steps back, as if about to be pulled. I saw her foot disappear behind a rock. Then the leg. Then the body, and, in the last second, she was still visible. Her eyes seemed to plead. I ran back to the truck. The doors creaked as if something were holding them open. But I managed to get in. I locked everything. The radio hissed even louder, until a child's voice whispered, deep within the interference. "He saw you." Inside the cabin, I huddled in my seat as if it were possible to diminish my presence, as if that would prevent that from perceiving me better. But it was too late. I felt it. Every part of my body knew. He was already close enough to hear my thoughts, my breathing, my oldest fears. The radio continued to crackle. But now there was something beneath the static, a muffled, rhythmic sound like heartbeats, only slower, deeper, as if coming from an enormous chest or from something that shouldn't be alive. My chest felt too small for the air I was trying to draw in. My hands were shaking so much that I had to hold them against the steering wheel to keep them from falling off. Then, the window next to me started to fog up. Alone. Gradually. Like the breathing of someone very close. I felt the temperature drop a few more degrees. "No. No. No," I whispered, too afraid to look. And that's when it happened. One finger, a single finger. It slid slowly across the glass, tracing an arc. Slowly, almost affectionately, as if he were studying me. I turned my face away, unable to look directly at her. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed inside my skull. That touch wasn't a child's. It didn't seem small. The trace the finger left was long, very long. When I finally managed to breathe, I felt something behind me, a minimal displacement of air, then another one, as if someone, or something, was approaching from the rear of the cabin. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, I saw movement, a fleeting shadow. It goes down at first, then it picks up. My brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it was my jacket moving, maybe some shadow cast by the headlights, but I knew there was no light there. The truck was dead. Everything was off. The entire cabin shook. It was as if something enormous had bumped against the side. I held my breath. And that's when I felt it. Two hands, cold ones, leaning against the back of my neck. They weren't human hands. The texture was strange, like wet skin mixed with cold sand. I felt the fingers opening, adjusting, as if that thing was measuring the size of my head, calculating something I didn't want to imagine. I let out an involuntary grunt, something between a sob and a cry for help. But the hands didn't go away. They pressed them. They tightened their grip, slowly, like someone testing the prey's reaction before crushing it. The radio exploded in intense static, and for a second I heard children's voices, dozens of them, overlapping each other. Some were laughing, others were crying, others were calling for someone, names I didn't understand, names that might have belonged to the victims of 1998. The touch on the back of my neck became firmer. I felt the cabin getting even narrower, as if the air were being squeezed out. I turned my head slightly, with what little strength I had left, and saw something in the corner of the rearview mirror. Something tall, very high, bent over in an impossibly awkward way, like a body that no longer resembled what it was like to be human. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see eyes. But I saw irregular contours, as if each part of it was moving in different directions, like solid smoke, or flesh trying to reorganize itself. I shouldn't have looked. The moment my eyes met that silhouette, I felt fingers on my back. Long fingers, too thin, too cold. They scratched my skin through my shirt, slowly, almost gently. The sound was so soft, so intimate. It felt like a possessive gesture. I stiffened in the seat. My whole body refused the idea of moving, but my mind screamed. I needed to get out of there. I needed to start the truck. I needed... A sharp sound cut through the air. Tock, tock, tock. Knocking on the cabin door. I froze. The hands that were on the back of my neck disappeared instantly. the shadow in the rearview mirror too. But the beatings continued, stronger now, faster. I slowly turned my face away, afraid of seeing that again. And I saw the child, the same child, barefoot, property. Her hair was stuck to her forehead, her face completely pale under the moon. She knocked on the door, looking directly at me with wide eyes, and he shouted, in a voice that shouldn't have come from a child, "He comes after those who stop." My body acted on its own. I jumped onto the steering wheel and turned the key so hard my fingers hurt. And for the first time that night, the engine responded. A dry, desperate roar, but vivid enough to pull me out of there. I put my foot on the gas pedal. The entire cabin vibrated. The radio suddenly switched off. The lights came back on. Dim, but they came back on. When I looked in the rearview mirror to try and see the child, she wasn't there anymore. And the shadow behind the truck dissolved into thin air, as if returning to the desert. "Go! Go! Move!" I yelled, with the accelerator floored, and the truck sped off down the highway, leaving behind the only thing that might have saved me, the only witness, the child, or what was left of it. The sun was already beginning to touch the horizon when Daniel decided to end his shift. His body trembled, his fingers still frozen despite the heater being on full blast. He parked the truck in a small lot, truck stop near Moab, a place so silent that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He descended slowly, his legs trembling. He didn't know if it was tiredness, fear, or that unsettling feeling that something had followed him. The truck window was still marked with small circles of ice, as if tiny fingers had touched it. He rubbed it with his sleeve, but the mark reappeared almost immediately. Daniel held his breath. He took a step back. He didn't want to look, but he did. And for a second, he was sure he saw a tiny hand, too small to be human, sliding along the inside of the glass. He went back inside the gas station, trembling. He ordered coffee, but could barely hold the cup. The attendant noticed. "Are you all right?" she asked. Daniel opened his mouth to reply, but something behind the woman caught his attention. In the reflection of the stainless steel coffee maker, a few meters from him, was the silhouette of the child, head down, bare feet, red dust stuck to her legs. He blinked hard. The figure vanished. "I saw a child on US 191, he said, his voice faltering. "She appeared on the road, then disappeared. And there was someone in the desert." The attendant froze for a second, then crossed her arms as if the air itself had turned cold. "You should leave here before dark," was all she replied. Daniel tried to insist, but she only shook her head, pale. That made him even more nervous. He returned to the truck, determined to drive to the nearest town. But when he opened the door, he found something on the passenger seat, a small footprint of dust, as if someone had entered the truck while he was away. He cleaned it. He rinsed it with water. He scrubbed hard. But the mark didn't disappear. Not only was it still there, it seemed to get clearer with each passing second. That's when he noticed the detail that completely chilled him to the bone. The footprint wasn't facing the windshield. It was facing him. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He didn't want to, but he slowly turned his face toward the rearview mirror. Behind him, on the bench, was the child. But this time, she had no face. It was just a dark void, without eyes, without a mouth, without anything. Only that impossible voice echoing inside the cabin. He's still there. And then, the truck door slammed shut on its own with a bang that echoed through the desert night.